Good morning.
Good morning.
Isn't it great to be alive and free?
Yes.
Well, we enjoy a lot of freedom here in this country, and I'm going to spend a few minutes with you telling what it's like to lose all of your freedoms. I mean, every bit. My story begins on the 2nd of January. I'm sorry. Already messed up. The story begins on December the 2nd, 1966. Seems like a long time ago, and it is. And I don't get tired of telling this story because I was out of jail for 1 month back in Ohio with my family, and I got a phone call from my ex-wife's sister. And she asked if I'd be willing to speak to her ladies association. And I said, well, you know, I've only been out of jail for a month, but I think I could do that. So I did. She reminded me it was April of 1973, because that's the year I was freed from prison in North Vietnam. So I'm not going to I'm not going to keep my eye on Barbie because she'll signal my mistakes. Anyway, it all began on the 2nd of December of 1966. And I was flying a escort mission with an electronic warfare bomber over North Vietnam. And the hunter became the hunted. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there was an explosion, and my airplane went out of control. The fire lights were flashing. No stick authority. I'm just tumbling. And I had been direct hit by a surface-to-air missile. And I'll digress briefly to tell you what they're called SAMs, S-A-M, surface-to-air missile. And the ones that they were using back in those days were pretty basic. The pointy end had the controls, the radar to guide the missile. And behind that was about 8 feet of a tube about this big. And that tube was filled with black gunpowder. And the inside of the missile was, as I said, filled with black gunpowder. And on the inside of the missile casing was rows and rows of steel rods, about that long, and in bands around the inside of the missile. And when the black gunpowder blew up, it shattered all these rings of steel rods and created an expanding ring of shrapnel, many rings. And that's what knocks your aircraft down, is the rows of excuse me, rows of steel rods. Well, if you're close enough to that, it's a sure kill. These rods go out and connect with your aircraft and knock it down. That's what happened. That's how my F4 got knocked down. Well, now I'll digress just a little and tell you why it's such a miracle that I'm here speaking with you. These rows of steel rods create an expanding ring of shrapnel. And I didn't see those shrapnel because all I saw was the fireball. Now when this thing blows up, you see this big red and orange and black fireball. And I fell right through the middle of that fireball. And I didn't get a scratch. Not even a John Kerry splinter in my arm. He was in Vietnam, you know, for a few months. Anyway, I fell through this fireball. I just had time to close my eyes and hold my breath, and I felt this hot flash. And I know I wasn't hallucinating, because when I got on the ground, I noticed that my eyebrows were burned off. Eyebrows and eyelashes were gone, and I should have been badly burned, but that's all I got was the eyelashes and the hair on my arms. Well, I came through the fireball, and I didn't get one scratch from the shrapnel, and I'll always believe that the hand of God was around me at that point. And I was a Christian when I was shot down, but I became a firm believer after I had that experience. Well, I didn't mention, but I was at 24,000 feet, doing about 500 miles per hour, when I encountered the missile. And so I had a long ways to go before I got to the ground. Now, proceeding from 24,000 feet, I just had to be patient and allow all the wonderful automatic features of the ejection seat and the parachute, which is supposed to open automatically and would have if I'd have left it alone. Well, I was, for the only time in my life, I felt panic, this feeling in my chest, and that I just felt that if I didn't get out of that ejection seat and have control of the parachute, I'd ride it into the ground, because surely the ejection seat was damaged, and all the automatic features with it. So against all my training, I pulled the handles, which activated the guillotines, severed the leg restraints, the lap belt, and the shoulder restraints, and pushed away from the ejection seat. And now I'm out there in this free air, just me and my parachute. I'm away from the seat now. That was a big mistake. So push away from the ejection seat. I was supposed to ride that down to 14,000 feet. And then even if I was unconscious, automatic feature there would activate and separate me from the ejection seat. And from then on, it was all automatic. Well, I've pushed away from the ejection seat now, and I lost all those features. And I'm falling through space, and that wasn't enough for me. I had to make sure my parachute was going to work. So I pulled the D handle, and bam, the parachute activated, and a loud bang of the opening shock. And now I've got me and my parachute, but I was way too high. That's why there's a loud bang, and the parachute opened okay, but I was way too high, and the ejection seat was separated, and the parachute deployed. And the reason you're not supposed to open your parachute at too high an altitude is the air is thinner up there, and you'll get the shock effect as the parachute goes bam and opens up. It was to the extent that my parachute deployed rapidly, and now I've got this parachute with two of the panels popped out. And I had a long ride down. It shouldn't have open the parachute until 14,000 feet. I opened it at about 18, and so I had a much longer ride in the parachute. But it worked, and one thing I always remembered was I looked around, and there was my co-pilot who ejected right after me, and so I was relieved to see that he survived. Well, we get on the ground, and a few minutes later, and I could see as I got closer to the ground that they were ready for me. And there was a crowd of peasants, farmers, running across the rice paddies. Rice paddies? Where's the jungle? Most of my missions were over jungle, not this day. It was all farming rice paddies. And so I could see I had no place to run and hide, and I would be captured immediately. So I did the only brave thing that day. I took my .38 revolver and threw it as far as I could, hit the ground, stood up, very brave, put up my hands. By this time, I'm circled by probably 20 or 30 of the farmers. Two of them had AK-47s, and they were pointing it at me, so I wasn't going to argue with them. Well, they marched me into their village, and there we waited for the authorities or army or whatever to come and pick us up. And we were there for a couple of hours. And many years later, when I made my visit to that village, thank them for treating me well, I asked them, why did it take so long for the army to come and pick us up? And they said, oh, in those days we didn't have a telephone in our village, so one of our young men had to get on a bicycle and pedal to the closest town that did have a telephone, and that's why it took the army so long to get to us. During this couple of hours or whatever, there was no harassment, no mistreatment. They were just curious, and they all wanted to file past and look at us and see what an American looked like. They told me years later, when I finally did visit that village, that I was the first American they'd ever seen. And so the army arrives, they strip us to our jockey shorts, blindfold us, tie our hands behind us, and throw us in the back of a truck. Off we went to Hanoi, stopping at every town and village on the way where they could brag and point to the latest Yankee air pirate that they had captured, and that's what they referred to us, was Yankee air pirate. Well, we spent the afternoon, evening, and that night traveling to Hanoi. It was only 85 miles, but they had to stop at every village along the way and put us on display. Now, remember, we're stripped to our jockey shorts and blindfolded, and guess what they wanted to do? Every village we went to, they wanted to spit on us. And so by the time we got to Hanoi, we were pretty nasty with all that spit and didn't get a chance to have a cold water bath for about a week. Well, we finally did get to Hanoi and drive to a structure which we later learned was what we called the Hanoi Hilton. It was the prison that the French had built when they controlled Vietnam. Nasty place. So I was put in a room, still blindfolded, and somebody came in and started asking me questions in English. And I answered them, name, rank, service number, and all that. Then he started wanting some military information, and that's where we got stuck. And I won't go through the details on that, but it got pretty nasty. And finally, the guy acted very, lost a lot of patience, I would say. And he said, you think about your crimes, And when I come back, you must answer the questions or you'll be seriously punished. They like to say, serial punish. So they came back and started the military questions, and I, of course, had to refuse to answer those, and lots of threats. And I didn't know what he meant by serious punishment. So what they did was they took the ropes off of my wrists and arms and put them in clamps behind my back, and then took a rope and tied it around my upper arm and cinched up on that until my elbows touched, and then just went away and left me. Well, after not too long a time, maybe 10, 15 minutes, I'm screaming and spitting and carrying on, and they came back in and said, okay, are you ready to answer the questions? I said, yes. So they loosened the ropes and began military questions again. Well, I thought I could outsmart them, and I just made up answers as I went along. And he was experienced enough in interrogation that he knew that I was just lying and making up answers. He said, you're wasting my time, you're lying, and you're going to be severely punished. And I said, this is barbaric, you're torturing me, and I need to see a doctor. This is probably my third big mistake. I said I was really hurting, and that I thought my back was broken. He said, oh, your back is hurting. And I said, yeah, I need to see a doctor. He said, well, you're not going to see a doctor until you answer my questions. Well, that didn't go well. And when I told him that my back was possibly broken, this time when they wrapped me up in the ropes, they put the rope around my arms and had me on the floor, face down, and they tied a rope around my neck and my ankles and pulled up on it until I was arched backwards like that. That gave new meaning to the word pain. And so I didn't last as long this time, but before they continued the interrogation, I got the idea that I would answer all their questions truthfully, except I would multiply every answer by 3. And I thought, that won't last long, but at least it'll give me a breathing space. Well, so they started the questions again, and truthful answers times 3. And I went through a series of questions, and he didn't show any response. And so after a while, he got tired and left the room. And here I got through that without any more torture. And the rest of the day went like that, where I'm multiplying my answers by 3, and he just accepted it. I couldn't believe it. And the rest of that day and the next day, where I have all these interrogations, different interrogators. A couple of them I could tell were pilots themselves, and they just accepted these times 3 answers. And so I couldn't believe my good fortune, but there it was. And on the 3rd day, they came in and threw the manacles and the ropes on the table and said, now you will write your confession. And I said, say what? I don't have anything to confess. I haven't committed any crimes. Oh, yes, you have. You've committed serious crimes against the Vietnamese people, and you must confess. So what happens? He came in with the handcuffs, the manacles and the ropes, and a piece of paper, and threw it on the table, and he said, now you well, write your confession. And I said, I have nothing to confess. So back into the ropes. Well, I didn't last in the ropes very long this time. I'm not too proud to say. And so they, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and I'm carrying on, and said, all right, I'll write your paper. And so they gave me 2 pieces of paper. One was blank, and the other one had these questions, and I had to answer them. So it was a 4-point confession. I confessed that I had bombed innocent villages and children, and innocent villages killing women and children. And the second point was that I was there in this illegal, immoral, and unjust war. And the third, I condemned the U.S. government for doing this. And the last point, I thank the Vietnamese people for their lenient and humane treatment. So I signed that, and they took me to a little cell, and no explanation, just threw me in this cell, and didn't hear much for a couple hours, and then they came in with my GI issue, and that was 2 sets of striped pajamas, 2 sets of drawstring shorts, a pair of rubber tire sandals. We call them Ho Chi Minh sandals. And the last thing was the best. It was a wonderful thing to have, and that is a mosquito net. The mosquitoes were really thick and lousy in that area, right near the Red River. So that was our personal equipment. I carried that into this waiting cell. A couple hours went by, and it started to get dark, and they loaded me and my co-pilot up, and off we went to parts unknown. Well, we went to the outskirts of Hanoi, and there was the main prison, which we called the zoo. We named it the zoo because we were kept like animals, and I was to spend the next 3.5 years in that prison and not go more than a few hundred feet in any direction. The living conditions. What's the matter?
You can go. Don't look at the watch.
It's okay. Thank you. So, life in the zoo. Most of the cells were tiny 7 by 9 feet or 8 by 10 feet. 2 and 3 man cells. We were locked up 24 hours a day, forbidden to exercise. If you were exercising, there was proof you were planning to escape. No freedoms. I'll tell you, a typical cell had 5 items of furnishings. First was the bed. Excuse me. The bed was, some water would be appreciated. So we have supposedly a bed. It's planks, wooden planks, no mattress, no mat, just laying on the wood, and that was the bed, the boards. Second B was the bulb. There's a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. And you might wonder, well, and it was on 24/7. Why would they leave the lights on all day in a poor backward country like Vietnam? That was because of the third B, the bricks. They had bricked up all the windows and vents so that we got no ventilation. And you know how it gets hot here, and well, it was like here, only maybe a little hotter in the summertime. Then the next B was the box. There was a loudspeaker box in every room. Thanks, Debbie. A loudspeaker box in every room, and that was for the daily ration of propaganda. In the previous war with the communists, they kept the guys full of propaganda by having classes. And they didn't want to do that with us. They wanted to keep us isolated. So they solved that easily by having little loudspeaker boxes in every cell. And that's how they piped in the propaganda to us. And that way they didn't have to allow us to see other people. Well, that pretty much tells you what a typical day was like. In the morning, they ring the gong, and the gong was just a piece of tubular metal that they beat on with a hammer, and that would wake us up. And then the next thing that happened is we'd get our morning meal, and that was a bowl of rice and soup. And the rice was pretty crudely milled, and it had little pieces of stone in it. And that caused broken teeth. By the time I got out of Hanoi, I had like 18 broken teeth from chomping down on the little millstones. And the problem was you were so hungry you just couldn't eat slowly and make sure you didn't have any millstone. And you'd chomp down on a piece of that and crack another tooth. Well, so there we have our morning meal. Next thing that happened was we were supposed to get out 10 minutes for a quick bath out of cold well water. Guards were lazy and they didn't like having to watch naked Americans, so if you got 2 to 3 times a week, that was doing pretty good. So next thing that happens is then we supposedly get a bath back in the cells, and they ring the gong, and you get to take siesta. In North Vietnam, they took siesta every day, which was noon to 2 hours. Well, that was really a great opportunity. We would wait until the guards all took their siesta, and there'd just be 1 or 2 guards wandering around the prison. And so that was a period of slack as far as security in the camp. So we'd give them a few minutes to lay down and take their siesta, and that's when we communicate. Now, we were forbidden to communicate, forbidden to see other Americans, and your daily existence was supposed to be one of silence. Well, they only had a couple of guards on duty, and that gave us the time, low security. That's when we communicated. And how did we communicate? You're not supposed to, you were only permitted to whisper. They told us if you need to speak to your cellmate, you may only whisper. Well, that wasn't going to work, so we developed communicating by tapping. That's it. So we'd spend the 2 hours communicating. And if you're lucky to have a 2 or 3 man cell, one guy would tap while the other one would be laying on the ground, peeking under the door, watching for a guard to come by. Well, our communicating was done solely by tapping. If they heard your voice, they'd punish you. And so that we couldn't have that happen. Well, we set up security for the whole camp. And guys are tapping on the wall, and it worked out pretty well. You just had to be careful not to get caught tapping. Only problem with this tap code is, like one of the prisoners said he asked the instructor in survival school, if you're tapping, how do you tap a dash? Think about that. Well, they didn't. The tap code is a matrix, 5 by 5. And once you see it, you never forget it. It's tap, tap is A, B is C, so on until you get to 1, 5. Then you start over and it's 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, and so on. The only problem with this, it's 5 by 5. And we have 26 characters in our alphabet. So what do you do for the 26th character? Well, they made a big mistake there. They dropped the middle letter in the alphabet, which is K. And you could use anything you wanted for K. Well, that wasn't good because guys were always misspelling my name, KC. Well, anyway, we got past that, and Z was 5, 5. Who needs a Z? They should have dropped the Z. Nothing is perfect. So now we've got a way to communicate, and we did. We really did communicate a lot. And for the next 2 or 3 years, that's the only way we had to communicate with guys in other cells, was through the tap code. And there are a lot of innovative ways to use the tap code, and I don't have time to go into it, but suffice it to say, we did a lot of communicating with that tap code. Well, 5 days in the week, and they're all the same. And then we get to Sunday, and the Vietnamese took off Sunday. They didn't do anything except they'd come around once in the morning, once in the afternoon, and give us our water ration and our 2 bowls of rice. And that was it. We didn't get out. Oh, they did allow us out to empty our bucket. And I forgot the 5th B, the bucket. That was our toilet. And after a couple of years, you get so they can't torture you every day, so you look for ways to entertain yourself. And when the guard would come around and open the door and allow you out to empty your bucket, that was a time to get a little needle at them. And we'd hear them coming down the row of doors. And as soon as we hear that, we'd take the lid off the bucket and start fanning. Fan as hard as you could, so that by the time they got to your cell, they'd open the door and they'd go, oh, and do the bucket emptying as fast as they could. It's amazing how you can entertain yourself with little things like that. Well, then it gets to be Sunday, and they shut down on Sunday. They don't do anything except open the door twice to give you your bowl of rice and once to empty the bucket. And so the rest of the time is completely dead. Nothing happens. And you're not allowed to talk or whisper. You're not allowed to, they said no whistle, no sing. And so what do? Well, we wanted to have some sort of church service. You can't sing, whistle. And so what we would do is we'd clear, look for guards coming, and then we'd do our little church. And it was just, we'd hit the wall all the way around, and that's the signal to start church. And no noise now. We start church and we stand up. We say the Pledge of Allegiance in a whisper, and then the Lord's Prayer, and then we take approximately 5 minutes where within your cell, quietly, you discuss whatever is the subject for today. And kind of like this. So after an estimated 5 minutes, we close church, sing, hum, or whatever, a hymn, and that's it for the week. But we always had a designated church, and a few of the guys, not many, but there's a couple that were atheists, and so although they wouldn't join in with what we were doing as far as a little church service, the couple of guys that were atheists, they'd stand guard, or they'd watch under the door for a guard approaching, and in that way enabled us to have a little worship service, and yet they weren't participating, but they were willing to help us, the rest of us. Well, this is how we lived. Very, except for when you're getting beat up, very boring, nothing to break the monotony. And it was just, it got to the point where dealing with boredom was a major issue. So we do crazy things just to break the monotony. For instance, I told you about bowing. Bowing was just a simple act of courtesy or whatever, and by this time we've been in this prison for several years, and we looked for ways to get at it. Every year at Tet, have you heard of Tet? That's the Chinese Lunar New Year, and they celebrate it much like we do Thanksgiving. And the Vietnamese, at least North Vietnamese, love dog meat. And they would, every year, get a few dogs in the camp and fatten them up. And then they'd butcher them and cook them like a turkey for the Tet dinner. Well, one year they had these dogs, like always, and I was being marched off at bayonet point to an interrogation. So this guard is, acting tough, taking me to, we call it quiz. Interrogations were quizzes. He's taking me to a quiz, and as luck would have it, this little dog came trotting along. He was going to be a meal for Ted. Well, I saw him coming, and he was coming right across my path. So I stopped and came to attention and very carefully bowed to this dog, while the guard immediately knew what I was insinuating and marched me off to the interrogation room and told the officer there what I had done. And so the officer gives me a tongue lashing and has me standing at attention for about 10 minutes, going through all the liturgy of war crimes. And when he was done, he screaming at me, he says, "Go back to your cell and think about your war crimes." And I'm trying to keep from laughing. And so I got to go back to my cell after only 10 minutes. Now the interrogation periods were 50 minutes and out of the hour, and that left 10 minutes for the officer to have a cigarette. They all are chain smokers. And so they get a cigarette break, and then the next guy comes in to be interrogated. Now, this is after 2 or 3 years. So here we are, marched back to my cell and feeling like I won that one because I didn't get beat up, and the interrogation only lasted 10 minutes of screaming. And this is in February now, and it's pretty chilly there, not as bad as sometimes here, but temperatures in the high 30s, low 40s. So this is how we lived. We had, what was it? I had one I wanted to mention. My brain just went
What
blank.
about your co-pilot? Where did he end up?
He ended up as my first cellmate for the first 6 months. Actually, I was only in solitary for a month, which is nothing. So this is how we were living, and here we are, about 3 years in now, and nothing changes. I mean, they have these interrogations, and we used to call them English lessons for the officers, and just really a boring life. It seemed like there was no end, and the treatment didn't ease off. I mean, the beatings and yeah. Here's a little religious comparison. For some reason, they got tired of tying guys up with the ropes, and here we are after several years of this really, really difficult times, difficult enduring, and I got caught sleeping in the nude. I told you how hot it was, hot and humid, no ventilation. And they do things like one of the guards would come around with a flashlight, and they had these little inspection hatches. And he quietly opened the inspection hatch and shined his flashlight in. Ah! You commit offense. And so he took me out to the officer on duty, and this is in the middle of the night, and he tells the guy what I had done, that I had taken my pajamas off and I was sleeping in the nude, and that it was an insult. He said that was an insult to the camp commander, and you will be punished. And I was. So they had me stripped down naked, lay face down on the ground, and with a truck fan belt, got a guy on either side of me and laid it to me with lashes. I don't know how many lashes I took, but I was in a world of hurts, and for sleeping in the nude. And so I went back to my cell with these red stripes up and down my back, and that, of course, immediately reminded me of the stripes of Jesus. So we had a little bit of that too. Well, this is at the 3-year point now. Nothing changes. We used to say, when will it ever end? And we didn't, of course, have an answer for that. Well, by this time, Lyndon B. Johnson had stopped bombing North Vietnam, and that was supposedly going to make them want to come to the negotiating table at the Paris Forever Peace Talks, and didn't do any good. And so here we are waiting for something to happen. And nothing happened. And the treatment was just as bad. You're forbidden to exercise, as I mentioned, because that proved that you were trying to get in physical condition to make an escape. And things were really bleak, looking very bleak. And then in September of 69, the good Lord took action in our favor. And Ho Chi Minh died. Ho Chi Minh died, and they had a month of mourning. And after the month of mourning, things started to change. We couldn't believe it. We were told that we didn't have to bow anymore. Just nod politely when you encountered a officer or guard. We were told that we could exercise, that we must exercise to keep your health. Well, say what? You know, just for the last 3 years, if we were caught exercising, you'd spend a week in irons. So told we must exercise. And other things were revealed, and they started coming on the camp radio. We called it the PA system, with all these new rules, and telling us we must exercise was one of them. And other very restrictive rules that they had put on us now are done away with. And the first indication we had something was changing was they came around and knocked out all the bricks from the windows. Wow, was that wonderful to have fresh air in there. And we started getting 30 minutes at the seepage well to bathe every day. And all these things that we've been suppressed with were brushed aside. We were given little items of freedom that we'd never experienced. Well, what had happened was Ho Chi Minh had died, and we found that there was a new sheriff in town. So many changes. Part of the bad years, I always like to tell this, is that the guards would come around and open the door, and you were allowed to go out and pick up your bowl of rice, go back in your room, and then they'd come around 10 minutes later and pick up the empty dishes. And for a while, we had this turnkey that we called Magoo, because he had a bad eye that was lazy and he couldn't focus. And one day, it was at lunchtime, I remember it well, he came around and opened the door and let us get our bowl of rice, and we have our bowl of rice, and then we're supposed to bow to him. And so I held it with one hand, and I went, stared him right in the eye, and it really hacked him up, and he stepped back and he kicked my bowl of rice that went flying all over the room. So I went without a bowl of rice for lunch that day, and had the questionable satisfaction of really irritating the turnkey. But we do crazy things like that to break the monotony. You know, they didn't have enough personnel to beat up on us and interrogate us every day. So you do things like that just to piss them off. And so that's how we were living until Ho Chi died. Ho Chi Minh died, and as I say, things started to change rapidly. And from then on, all these harassments of bowing and just all the things they did to us stopped. And so life became a lot easier once you didn't have to wonder when they opened the door, would you get a beating or a bowl of rice? So that really changed our lives. And so now we're entering into life without Ho Chi Minh. And he was indeed one of the great war criminals of the 20th century. They, of course, always made him out to be a hero and a man of the people and all that. He was a sinister, evil man. So now we're into the last part. And now is when we have a little more freedom. And we could have our education programs. We exercised. Guys that wouldn't exercise were ridiculed. And we seriously wanted to keep our health and be as fit as we could. So this next period of life was completely different. The last 2 years weren't as interesting in many ways because we weren't getting beat up all the time. So we were able to organize ourselves. And another thing happened right at about the same time was the Sante raid. Some of you that were in the military may have heard of the Sante raid. It was a multi-service attempt with long-range helicopters and support aircraft. And the intention was to go to this camp, which was out in the boondocks from Hanoi, and to liberate the camp. And they knew that there was about 65 prisoners in that camp. And so they went ahead and, time?
No, keep going.
I think I have a few minutes, yeah.
Take all you want.
No. Anyway, here we are with this newfound freedom, and so we organize ourselves. And I mentioned the Sante raid. So after the Sante raid, don't forget your book. She has to leave early.
She's coming back.
So after the Sante raid, the Vietnamese panicked, and they very much reacted to this attempted raid on the camp at Sante. So they told us to roll up our blanket and our mosquito net and get ready to move. And what we did, they loaded us all up on trucks, and off we went back to Hanoi. Now we drove into the main entrance and through a gate and through a big courtyard into another part of the camp that we didn't even know existed. And there was a big open area surrounded by large rooms that held 60 to 70 men. And they put us all in these big rooms, and we couldn't believe it, you know. Here we'd been living with maybe 10 or a dozen guys in a room, and now here we are. There's 50, in my room there was like 55 guys. And we'd never seen a crowd before in all the years. Well, here we are. We're looking around, and the one thing that was interesting here is that we knew the names. Through our tap code, we'd memorized the names of everybody in camp. I had 350 names I'd go over every day. And so here's all these guys, and it was so interesting that we knew their name, but had never seen them. And it took no time at all to connect a name to a face. And so here we are. What are we going to do now? We're in a big room with a lot of guys. And this is when we organize our classes. We taught classes, and any guy had an expertise. He was obliged to organize it and teach it. And so we had all sorts of courses that we could take. And then in the morning, we'd all get up and exercise, and then have morning class, and then lunch and afternoon class, and then on Sundays we had church when we'd actually sing audibly, and guys would take turn being the preacher, and they were obliged to. And it was all voluntary, and if you wanted to teach the lesson that week, you were free to do so. Well, of course, this made life a lot easier. And I still remember some of the German that I learned in prison. So now life settles in for the last year and a half. And a lot of things going on there. We had learning, we had worship, we didn't have to hide it. And life was a lot easier those last 2 years. Well, one of the last things that Lyndon B. Johnson did was, he completely stopped bombing all of Vietnam. For a while, it was just the big cities, Hanoi, Haiphong, and that. But then he trying to get the peace talks moving and cooperation, which he never got, stopped bombing all of North Vietnam. Complete stop of all bombing. Well, that was great for the Vietnamese. They didn't have to worry about air raids and all that. And but it didn't do a darn thing for our peace efforts. The liberals thought that, well, if we stop bombing them, then they'll come to the conference table and we'll end the war. It never happened. So then we get to 1972, and I don't remember the provocations, but we started, President Nixon started bombing North Vietnam again. And they'd go in the pool, out of the pool, and act like they were going to move towards a peace agreement, and then they'd back off and do something. So it's in the pool, out of the pool. So then in the fall, the bombing was halted for a short period just to see what would happen, and nothing happened. So President Nixon authorized the bombing with B-52s. And there was 2 weeks of nonstop bombing every night. They only did it at night. Nonstop bombing of all of North Vietnam. And then the B-52s were sent against just Hanoi and Haiphong. And so that got old in a hurry for the Vietnamese. And having this string of B-52s bombing their capital city in Haiphong was more than they could take. And so they sued for peace. And then just after Christmas, we were told that the peace agreement had been signed. And that peace agreement had been signed, and that all the prisoners were going to be released. They had us all form up in the big courtyard. Camp commander came out with a podium and a loudspeaker microphone, and he read to us in Vietnamese, and then it was translated to English, the protocol on the release of the prisoners, including the dates. And so at that point, it was just after Christmas, we knew that the war was over and we were going home, and there were 4 release groups with a date, and we knew when we would be going home. In my case, it was right the second release group. So we had a date and we knew when we were going to be released. And you can imagine how much that raised our morale. Well, the time came up for 4th of March, 70. Gotta get this right. 73. She says right. 4th of March, 73. And we went to this big room in the prison there where they had clothes laid out on the table, and shirt, pants, real shoes. And we were loaded on buses and out to Hanoi Airport. And we were offloaded from the buses according to our shoot-down data rank. So me and my backseater and another guy were shot down on the 2nd of December. We're the next to file it off and step up and salute the American Brigadier General. There was a receiving officer. Turn right out to the airplane. We called it the Hanoi taxi. So we walk out to that airplane, and here's 2 flight attendants on the ramp to walk up, and they gave every guy a hug and a kiss as we got up on the airplane. Always remember that. And then we're all loaded on the airplane. They closed the ramp, and off we went. And the interesting thing here, I always try to remember this. As we got off the bus, approached the general, saluted him, turned right, went out to the airplane. Nobody broke a smile. Everybody was stone sober. And got on the airplane, got a seat. Airplane cranks up and taxis out, takes off. And when the airplane rotated and broke ground, pandemonium. All of a sudden, all that emotion was stored was let loose. And we're just yelling and carrying on. It was just really an emotional moment that when we broke ground, that we were free of that scum-sucking country, North Vietnam. Well, we flew to Clark and got off the airplane there at Clark. They had buses waiting for us, and all the families were out there to greet us. And it was an interesting note here. In Hanoi, the word was out when we came out of the prison. There's a big crowd of civilians. They'd never seen an American, so here's these Americans leaving. And they were very drab, dark browns and black, and very drab clothes. And when we got to Clark and got off the airplanes and saw all the families were out there on the flight lane to greet us, and the colors, just like in this room, it was just really amazing to see all these bright colors. Well, they drove us to the hospital. We got off of the bus and up to our assigned rooms. And guess what's the first thing we did?
Shower.
You heard this before. Yeah, we took a shower, a hot shower, as long as you wanted. And we all stood in those showers until my fingers were all crinkly. Dried off, put on our hospital pajamas, and downstairs to the cafeteria for our first meal. Guess what the first meal was?
Rice.
Steak and eggs. Steak and eggs. Cooked any way you wanted them. So some guys wanted their steaks well done. I don't know why, but and the eggs, different ways you can fix eggs. And of course this created a line. You know, some guys want their steak well done, others want it rare. And so they're cooking everyone to order. And this caused a line to generate. Excuse me. So we got this line of guys waiting for their steak and eggs. And the doc, there's a couple of docs, typical docs, that just couldn't wait to get their hands on us. They were supposed to start the next morning. And here these, we call them quacks. The quacks are here. And they were going up and down this line asking guys questions, which that was fine. And guy came up to me and he says, well, what have you been looking forward to the most? And I said, get serious, Doc. I said, I was over 6 years in that jail. I never saw a woman, much less had a glass of whiskey. He said, well, I can't do anything about the former, but what kind of whiskey were you drinking? I said, Jack Daniels. I get up to my room after the meal is over, and here's a quart of Jack Daniels laying on the pillow. I took that, threw the cap away, took a nice drag from that bottle and passed it around to my buddies that had gathered when they heard about the whiskey. And that finished the first day in freedom. And I'm here to tell you it's been a wonderful life ever since. I wouldn't do the prison gig again for any amount, and at least until I met Barbie. It was just an unbelievable experience, start to finish. And I feel it made a better man of me. And as I said, I wouldn't do it again, but it was a unique growing experience. And if you want to ask any questions, my time is up. So we can.
What are your POW reunions like?
Well, just like other military reunions.
What do you talk
Talking.
about? Do you talk about?
What do I talk? What do we talk about?
Yeah,
We
like
talk about our life since, and reminisce some of the things that happened while we were in prison.
you did. Okay.
Yeah.
And you laugh about it.
And you what?
And you laugh about it now, right? Because it's like,
Oh yeah. Got to keep a sense of humor.
How long
So-
would you say it took you to recover from that experience? It felt like your life was normal.
Who says I'm normal?
No longer in prison.
Yeah. Well, just thank God every day for freedom.
Colonel, sir, I'd like to say, every one of us appreciate, and if they don't, and I just wish younger people understood the sacrifices that not you, but all of them paid,
Yeah.
and the ones that died too. And, you know, it's like people saying, thank you for your service. And I know your answer and our answer is always, no, it's the ones that didn't come back you need to thank, and the
Well,
ones that
that's
didn't
true.
come back whole. We appreciate the sacrifice that you made, which is a very godly thing. You paid an awesome price that we might maintain freedom. And that's why in America today, they need to understand the horrors of going against what the prices have been paid by men, great men like you and women. So God bless you, sir, and thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your honor. I appreciate, I don't have a right to, but I will salute you anyway, sir. God bless you.